Hi, my name is Abby Chadwick, and I will be presenting today on Lots of Trouble, an article written by Marielle Segarra um, about absorption costing and what happened in the automaking industry. Before the Great Recession, several of the leading automakers began producing vehicles at a rate that exceeded market demand. And this article goes into why they were making that decision to overproduce and the related consequences that came because of it. So, um, in order to appear more profitable, companies began to produce more cars than they can sell. And by using absorption costing, they were able to hide most of the fixed costs in inventory because they weren't being sold and so they weren't being expensed. And so this is a way they found to manipulate their expenses and make it look like the cost per unit was decreasing when really they were actually incurring more costs. They were just kind of stuck in inventory. And so it made them look more profitable than they really were. And so it allowed them to manipulate their short-term earnings, but it led to several long-term consequences, which we will go into. So automakers found that there were several downsides related to this overproduction. One was that it increased their maintenance and storage costs. So now that they had so many cars, they had to find a place to park them. And they had to find a way to perform maintenance on all of them, and those costs really began to add up because they had produced so many cars that they weren't selling. A second downside was that they had to increase their advertising costs by quite a bit because they had so many extra cars that they weren't able to sell, and so they kept trying to sell them. They had to run more ad campaigns, advertising reduced prices, and so those costs increased as well. The third downside that came because of this was a decline in brand image. So researchers correlated a 1% of rebate with 2% decline in appeal. That was from J.D. Power and Associates. So in plain English, basically they said they began dropping their prices, and because they had so many rebates, they became less and less appealing. And it was more damaging than it was allowing them to sell more cars. So that was a decline in brand image that it was a long-term effect of some of their short-term decisions. And so the remedy that was suggested in this article is comprised of three things. And they suggest we avoid these three things or that we avoid making the same mistakes by adhering to these three principles. One is to record excess capacity as an expense on the internal income statement. This will help you better evaluate whether it is worthwhile to produce more, or if you should leave that capacity open. And this will help you decide that. It will help you have some perspective about those trade-offs. Two is to change the way executives are paid. In the case of these automakers, they were focused on short-term results, and their management found short-term solutions, but that really damaged them in the long term. So be careful about focusing on the short term, because you might end up with destructive long-term consequences. And the third suggestion is to not use financial reporting methods to make internal decisions. Different information is needed to make different types of decisions, and the information that you need to make internal decisions is different than the financial information that is reported. And so be aware of this, and do not base your internal decisions on how you want your financial reports to look, because you'll be using information that comes from the wrong perspective, and that can lead to incorrect decisions. So thank you for joining me for this presentation on lots of trouble and learning about absorption costing. And that's the end.